Okay, good morning. Welcome back to Parsha Perspectives for today. Sorry for the delay. Baruch Hashem was attending a bris. Always, we should be delayed for simchas in our lives. Want to thank our generous Parsha series sponsors, as always, Becky and Avi Katz and family, in memory of Becky's father. Our learning should be Leili Nishmas, David Grossman, David Ben Menachem Monash. Our Parshas Chayei Sarah, the beginning, page 106 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash. Thank you for braving the elements and joining us this morning. Not looking for sympathy from those in New York and elsewhere, but I'm just saying that Boca Raton this morning, when I came to shul at 6:15 this morning, it was 46 degrees, but the weather app said feels like 33. And we don't have heat. We're not set up for it. So anyway, thank you for being here. Parshas Chayei Sarah, page 106. Vayu Chayei Sarah, 100 shana v'yasrim shana v'sheva shanim, shnei Chayei Sarah. Sarah's lifetime was 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years. These were the lives of Sarah. I want to begin. Today is the 5th yahrzeit of the great Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, Rav Yaakov Tzvi and David Aryeh, whom we miss terribly. By we, I mean the entire Jewish world, and I would argue the world. His voice of moral clarity and insight, his brilliant mind, and even more brilliant heart are sorely missed. So we'll begin with an insight he has, the introduction to our Parsha. And he writes the following: a well-known comment by Rashi in the apparent superfluous phrase, Shnei Chayei Sarah. Let's look at Rashi first. Lekach niftas shana b'chol klal uchal. Here the Torah adds the word year with each one. Mea shana, esrim shana, sheva shanim. The much more efficient way to have formulated it would have been, she was 127. She was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. The repetition of the word years is redundant and feels entirely unnecessary. It must come to teach something. Says Rashi, what it comes to teach is, Bas kuf kebas chaf lechet. When she was 100, she was as pure and innocent as she was at 20. Bas chaf lo chata shayena bas onshin af bas kuf lo lechet ubas chaf kebas zayin liyofi. So just like one is only accountable for sin, so to say, at 20, so too she at 100 was still as pure, innocent, and not accountable. She had not sinned, and at 20 she was as beautiful as at 7. So Rabbi Sacks, picking up on this anomaly, this teaching of Rashi, writes, how could anyone say that the years of Sarah's life, and Rashi continues and says, Shnei Chayei Sarah, Kulan Shavin Latova. These were the years of Sarah's life, also redundant, superfluous. Once you told me she lived 127 years, I have the years of her life. I got it. Why do you have to end the sentence by saying these were the years of her life? Says Rashi, Kulan Shavin Latova. Torah wants us to know all equal, all for the good. Wonders Rabbi Sacks, how could you say Sarah's life were equally good? Twice, first in Egypt, then in Gerar, she was taken against her wishes into a royal harem. There were years when, despite Hashem's repeated promise of many children, Sarah suffered from infertility, unable to have even a single child. And we know the Torah tells us, Talmud tells us, that when someone is struggling with infertility, chashav kames, that loneliness, that lack of a feeling of continuity, it can be as painful, as unbearable as death. How could you say Sarah's life, 127 years, all were good, all were pleasant, all were pleasurable? There was a time she persuaded Avraham to take her handmaiden Hagar, have a child by her, which caused her great grief in spirit. These things constituted a life of uncertainty and decades of unmet hopes. How can you say Kulan Shavin Latova? So Rabbi Sacks quotes, many say this in the name of Viktor Frankl, but Viktor Frankl himself quoted it from Nietzsche, who was one of the most brilliant thinkers of the modern age and also one of the most dangerous. Yet, one of his most famous remarks is both profound and true. He who has a why in life can bear almost any how. He who knows his why. Why are we here? Why do we live? What do we believe? What do we believe about our immortality and eternity and the afterlife? He who has a why can bear almost any how. Avraham and Sarah are among the supreme examples in all of history of what it is to have a why in life. The entire course of their lives came as a response to a call, a divine call to live in a land where they would be strangers, abandon every conventional form of security, and have the faith to believe that by living by the standard of righteousness and justice, they would be taking the first step to establishing a nation, a land, a faith, and a way of life that would be a blessing to all of humankind. Avraham and Sarah, despite the promise they were given, did not have it easy. It was not smooth sailing. It was a roller coaster of ups and downs. And how did they navigate? How did they endure? Because they knew their why. And if you know your why, we know our why. We know our why is the Ribono Shalom, the Almighty, that we live in service of Him, that we're not victims of chance and randomness, but there is order and purpose to this world. We know our why. We're here to serve. We're on a mission. We're here to repair and redeem His world. We know our why. And when one knows their why, they have the resolve, the tenacity to endure, to face any how. And that's how Sarah and Avram, the first who were given that why, that mission, Lech Lecha, they were sent with a purpose. Because they knew their why, they were able to endure every how. Surviving whatever fate threw at them, however much it seemed to derail their mission, Avram and Sarah knew that what makes a life satisfying is not external but internal, a sense of purpose, mission, of starting something that would be continued by those who came after, of bringing something new into the world by the way they lived their lives. What mattered was the inside, not the outside. Their faith, not their often troubled circumstance. Faith helps us to find the why that allows us to bear almost any how. The serenity of Sarah and later Avram's death is eternal testimony to how they lived. The fact that we can testify, Kulan Shavan Latova, because the fact that Sarah knew her why meant they were equal in her ability to endure every how. She didn't say good years and bad years, pleasurable years, pleasant years, and painful years. She said they were all Shavan Latova because they were all part of the mission. They were all part of the purpose. She knew her why. She can endure any how. I don't know if anyone read Eliezer Rabbi's book, Hostage, about what it was like to endure being held captive in the tunnels, below ground, above ground. Unbelievably and unbearably painful memoir of that torturous time. It's a well worth the read. It shakes us and jars us, but it's important to understand there are many insights. Now is not the time to share, but I'll tell you, he was in a tunnel, being held captive, tortured, starved, deprived, obviously of his freedom and so much more that we take for granted. And he was struggling with the how. And Efrem Goldberg was united with him. Two groups of hostages were brought together for a short time. And Hirsch is the one who quoted this teaching, quoted it from Viktor Frankl, and said, he who knows his why can endure any how. And Eliezer Rabbi credits his enduring through being held captive until he attained his freedom, just to learn that his wife and daughters had been killed on October 7th. What kept him alive was the hope he'd be reunited with them, but upon his freedom he found out what had happened to them. He says he doesn't regret not knowing earlier because it was that hope that enabled him to survive and to live. But it was Hirsch who gave him that resilience. It was Hirsch who taught him that anyone who knows their why can live their how. And while that teaching is quoted in the names of others, it was Avram who taught us, Kulan Shavan Latova, that all were equal for good for Sarah's life and later Avram's, because the serenity of their death is testimony to how they lived. Now, this opening of our Parsha, we know the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us that Avram, Asar Nisyonos Nisnasu Avraham Avinu, Avram endured 10 tests in his lifetime. And indeed, we are told that we too, walking in his footsteps, we have our own challenges. We have our own tests. We confront our own tribulations. And just like Avram, as the Ramban writes, that Avram realized his potential through the tests that he overcame, we too have no idea the strength we have within until it's tested. It's when we're tested that we find out who we are, what we're made of, what we can become. I love to tell, I probably said before in the Parsha Shir, many, many years ago, I read an article that was talking about this in general, and it said the following example of a story, that there was a very wealthy man who hosted a dinner party at his magnificent home and estate, and was giving a tour to the dinner guests before dinner was served. And among the many pools that he had in his estate, there was one filled with very dangerous sharks and piranhas, dangerous fish. And he challenged his guests, almost as a joke, whoever can jump in and swim and make it out the other side, I'll give you whatever you want of my wealth, of my assets, of my estate. They all turned to continue the tour, and they heard a splash. And they turned around and they saw someone in the pool swimming for his life, navigating in between these dangerous, lethally dangerous fish. The man made it to the other side. He climbed out. he's wearing his formal wear, and he's dripping wet, soaking, and he's panting, exhausted, out of breath. And the host says to him, I promised, whoever would swim to the other side can make it out alive. I'll give you whatever you want. What is it? What do you want? And the man said, what do I want? I want one thing. I want to know who pushed me in. And the lesson is, sometimes when we're pushed in, we find the strength and the ability and the talent and the tenacity to make it to the other side. To jump in of our own volition, to volunteer, we don't have it. We don't have what it takes. But when we're pushed, those are the Asar Nisyonos Nisnasu Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu was pushed 10 times. Omdu b'kulam, and he surpassed them all. And we too, when we're tested, when we're pushed, instead of resisting and instead of resenting, we can embrace the test to be able to grow, to realize potential that was latent within, to swim like mad, to make it to the other side, and to recognize that that test is helping us emerge to be our better or our best selves. Which was the 10th test? When does the list of 10 tests end? So the most popular answer is last week, the end of Parshas Chayei, with the ultimate test, the pinnacle of the test of Akedas Yitzchak. When Avram was told, take your son, your only son, the son you love, and slaughter him. And Avram surpassed, Avram fulfilled that test. But Rabbeinu Yonah had a different tradition. Rabbeinu Yonah's commentary on Avos writes, the 10th test was the beginning of this week's Parsha. This episode, when Sarah dies, this is the 10th test. Where's the test at the beginning of our Parsha? Lech Lecha is a test. Being thrown in the fiery furnace was a test. Being told to sacrifice your son is a test. Where is the test at the beginning of Parshas Chayei Sarah? Where is the test? We've shared in the past several interpretations. Some say the test was, would Avram be filled with regret? After all, he went to fulfill this charge. He went to take his son, and he came home to find it cost him his wife's life. Sarah died because she heard what happened, and she was literally scared to death. She was scared to death. Someone, and we learn from here the proper way to tell news. First you call and you say, everything's okay. Everyone's okay. But listen to this crazy story, your grandchild on the playground, and they tripped and they fell and we had to go to the, but everything's okay. You start with everything's okay, then you tell the crazy story. You don't start with, Sarah, did you hear? Avram took your son, your only son, the son you waited so long for. God told him to take him to the top of the mountain and slaughter him. And so he took him to the top of the mountain with a knife. And before you get to the end of the story, Sarah had a heart attack. She was scared, frightened to death, and she died. And how would Avram feel when he came back and he found out that while he maybe passed that test, it cost him his wife's life? Would he regret? Would he look back and wish he hadn't done it? That too is a test. Sometimes we're tested about doing the right thing. And sometimes then we're further tested when doing the right thing didn't bring the results that we wanted. Are we still proud that we did it? Or do we regret? Do we have remorse? Do we wish we could redo it? This is what we say in our davening every night in Hashkivenu. V'haser Satan milfanenu umeacharenu. Hashem, remove the Satan from before us and from behind us. Satan before us, I know. The Satan in front of me is the bag of Cape Cod potato chips. Satan in front of me is the juicy gossip I want to share. The Satan in front of me is the image I want to watch. The Satan in front of me is whatever the next temptation I face. But what's the Satan behind us? If it's behind us, aren't we done? If it's behind us, haven't we passed? The answer is, even when sometimes we do the right thing, when it didn't work out the way we wanted, do we regret having done it? Avram didn't regret. This too was a test. That's how some understand. Others say Avram had to deal with Ephron, this low-life salesman who was echad b'peh ve'echad b'leiv, this duplicitous, hypocritical, smooth-talking, conniving, manipulative salesman, Ephron Hachiti. Here Avram is in a state of grief. He's lost his other half, his better half. He's broken, and he has to now negotiate with this lowlife, but he does it with dignity. He does it with derech eretz. He never loses himself. He carries himself, we'll see in a moment, with a kiddush Hashem. Maybe that's what Rabbeinu Yonah meant was the test. But I want to share with you a third interpretation that I heard this year. You know what the test was for Avram? Until now, the first 9 tests, he shared the experience. He shared the challenge with Sarah. He came back and he said, Sarah, you won't believe what I went through. You won't believe what happened. You don't believe how I feel. You don't believe how hard it was. And he and Sarah, he was able to confide, turn to her, talk to her, rely on her. This was the first time Avram would have to go through something difficult, knowing he was coming home to an empty house, knowing he wouldn't have someone to talk to confide in, to experience, to share it with. This was the first time. And for Avram, that too is a test. There was the test of losing Sarah. There was the test of negotiating with Ephron, but there was the test of now going through life. In fact, if you fast forward, I'll tell you an insight later. If you fast forward to later in the Parsha, Torah tells us, it's from Rabbi Soloveitchik, when Avram dies, the Torah tells us that Yitzchak is broken. And how does it tell us that Yitzchak is broken? Vayinachem Yitzchak acharei imo. Yitzchak is comforted for the loss of his mother. It's interesting to note, this pasuk, that despite the obvious pain over Sarah's death, Yitzchak is not mentioned at all regarding the mourning over Sarah or her subsequent burial. Just he's comforted. Why doesn't it say he's broken? Why doesn't it say he cried? Why doesn't it say he gave a eulogy? So Rav Soloveitchik quotes the maxim of Chazal. The Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Chav Beis tells us, Ein isha mesa ella lebaila. The mourning for a wife or a wife for a husband falls primarily on the spouse. An integral part of the imperative to mourn is the obligation to bury. Halacha states that the husband has primary responsibility for the burial of his wife. Yes, children losing a parent, it's painful. There's grief and there's loss. But it's also the way of the world. The way of the world is that children are meant to outlive their parents. So it's painful. There's grief and they seek comfort. But when a spouse loses a spouse, they lost their other half. And therefore, Avram's loss of Sarah is not comparable to Yitzchak's. Yitzchak is comforted. Avram cries and is broken. Ein isha mesa ella labaila. That relationship, that pain, that loss is categorically different from all other losses. And that's why, and that's how the Torah here is telling us, maybe the test, the final test, the 10th test of Avram is to have to go through Sarah's loss without Sarah. He doesn't get to sit Shiva with Sarah. He doesn't get to at night talk about who came, what they said, who said ridiculously stupid things that were unhelpful and were hurtful. He didn't get to at night reflect. He didn't get to sit and partner with Sarah in that grief experience. He had to do it without her, and maybe that was the 10th test that he endured. Okay, there's another insight. Last week I introduced you to Rabbi Efrem Goldberg, my friend's wonderful Sefer Torah United, and here he quotes a different of the Hasidic masters. And this is the great Piazetzner Rebbe, Hashem Yikom Damo, Kalana Kalman Shapira, the Eish Kodesh, who was the spiritual leader in Piazetzner, later in the Warsaw Ghetto. And his powerful sermons in the ghetto were collected. He scribbled notes. He buried. They were part of the Einig Shabbos archives. They were discovered in canisters buried underneath the Warsaw Ghetto in 1960. Not all of them. Maybe still one day we'll recover more. But he has a remarkable teaching here on Parshas Chayei Sarah from a drasha he delivered Shabbos Parshas Chayei Sarah, November 4th, 1939. November 4th, 1939. I can't imagine the responsibility of standing up and speaking to a group of skeletons holding on for dear life who had lost almost everyone they knew and were living the torture of the Warsaw Ghetto, seeing death, surrounded by death and by loss, and having to find something meaningful, something comforting to say. November 4th, 1939, this is what the Piazetzner Rebbe said. This was his drasha. It's in the Holy Eish Kodesh. Pirish Rashi tells us 100 like 20, 20 like 7. Kulun Shavan Latova. Ask the Piazetzner V'Navina Ma Merame Zelanu Shebekol HaTzidkanios and Iskaros B'Torah L'Nemer Kolkach. What was so special about Sarah that this is not mentioned among any of the other righteous, not only other tzidkanios righteous women. Od ze Yosef Pella, shagam ba'Avraham Avinu, shenemar lekolon gam kein shana b'chol klal. With Avram's loss, also the word year is added, inserted, and Rashi there says gam kein shenir mashay b'lochet mikol makom, and yet with Avram it doesn't end elu shnei chayei Avram. Why don't we end the report of the length of Avram's life by repeating Shnei Chayei Avram? Even Avram didn't rise to the level of Sarah. Sarah is unique. Sarah is distinct. Sarah is the only one who rose to this level that we say about her. These were the years of her life. They were all equal. Why? What was so amazing? What was so special? And says the Piazetzner Rebbe. He quotes from Menachem Mendel of Rimenov on the comparison drawn in the Gemara between salt and suffering. The Gemara says, Bris melach v'nemar bris yisurin. Ma melach mimatekes habasar. Just like salt brings out the sweetness of the meat, it flavors the meat. Af yisurin mirak mimarkin. So too suffering brings out. Tainu ma melach in most of Yosef Kashir Yashal Kabal Aname Abasar. When it comes to salt and it comes to suffering, each of them draw out and bring out a flavor. Salt brings out the flavor of the meat, and suffering, as we said, the test that helps us realize the potential, it brings out the flavor of life. But there's another parallel, says the Piazetzner, quoting Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Rimenov, that if you add too much salt, you ruin the meat. And if you have too much suffering, you ruin the life. You ruin the life. And this is what he said. He said, our master Moshe, these are the Rebbe's own words, I'm reading it to you in the translation, right? The juxtaposition of Sarah's death at the beginning of our Parsha with the Aked and Parshas Vayera, a casual link, Sarah died after hearing her only son had been bound like a sacrifice. So the Rebbe said the following, our master Moshe, the faithful shepherd, juxtaposed the death of Sarah to Aked as Yitzchak in order to advocate for us, to demonstrate what happens when there's too much suffering. Her soul departed. If this could happen to Sarah, so righteous a woman, that when she was 100, she was like 20 with regard to sin. All of Sarah's years were equivalent for good, yet she could not bear such deep agony. How much more so is this true for all of us? Even the greatest, most pious Jews of all time were fragile human beings who could be broken by intolerable, unparalleled suffering. Piazetzner Rebbe boldly claims that Sarah's death, the result of overwhelmingly psychological trauma, was an act on behalf of all the Jews. Sarah's death was a protest to Hashem, a demonstration the Jewish people cannot bear excessive suffering. She gave up her life in order to teach Hashem the limits of human suffering. She chose to show Hashem the effect of suffering when it's too much to bear. This is what the Piazetzner Rebbe told that group of Jews in November 1939. And when did he do it? What was happening in his life? Only 2 months earlier, the Rebbe had suffered one of the most excruciating blows of his life. The death, the murder of his only son, his daughter-in-law, his sister-in-law, all killed by the Nazi aerial bombing of Warsaw in September 39. And speaking of Sarah's loss, the Rebbe's own tormented voice is audible. In this gut-wrenching drasha, the Rebbe affirmed that crushing heartbreak and psychological pain can be traumatic. In severe cases, a part of us dies. While the classic religious response to suffering is submission, Sarah confronted the Creator, challenging heaven to be more responsive and compassionate. The gesture legitimates, the Rebbe seems to say, our wrestling with theodicy. We're permitted, perhaps even obligated, to press Hashem in our search for beacons of truth and justice in the smothering fog of suffering. And he ends, the Rebbe ends with a tefillah. V'zeh metaretz hapasuk Shnei Chayei Sarah shelachora chata Sarah neged shar shnoseha. Sarah, so to say, sinned against the rest of her years. She could have and should have lived longer, but Sarah died as an act of protest to Hashem. I can't take the suffering. The thought of the loss of the sacrifice of my own son. Lachios bim lolacha kokach liba ma'isa akeda v'kevan shelatovas Yisrael asa merames hapasuk Shnei Chayei Sarah. Because she did so as an act of protest to Hashem on behalf of the Jewish people, that Hashem stop the suffering, take away the suffering, don't make us suffer so much. Therefore, the Torah equates all of her years as equal. Lachain, and then the Piazetz Rebbe, November 1939, 2 years after the heinous murder and loss of his son, daughter-in-law, and others, the Rebbe ends with a tefillah. The Rebbe ends with a tefillah. And what's the tefillah? Lachain yirachem Hashem aleinu v'akol Yisrael v'yoshienu b'meira beruchnius v'gufnius b'chasadim niglim. Hashem, have compassion and let rescue us spiritually and physically with an open sense of kindness. It's a powerful, powerful drasha, Parshas Chayei Sarah, by the Piazetz Rebbe, November 1939. Ultimately, he is deported and murdered in a slave camp. Hashem Yikom Damo, the great Piazetz Rebbe. He's talking about Sarah not being able to bear the pain, but he's talking about himself. He's talking about that protest. The article I wrote last week from a letter that I received from a Jew calling out and crying to Hashem in protest. Where are you and how could you? And I can't take the pain. And you see precedent, as we wrote, Avram challenging Hashem over stone. You see precedent, Yonah, Eov, Yechezkel, Yirmiyahu. You see precedent. And here you see precedent. The Piazetz Rebbe says and claims Sarah Imeinu literally gave up her life in protest to Hashem stop the suffering. And a piece of us dies when we suffer excessively, exceedingly too much. And we ask Hashem, like the Piazetz Rebbe did, to end with compassion. Interestingly, Vayakam Avram, Perach of Gimel Pasuk Gimel. Sarah dies in Kiryas Arba, Hebron. Avram came to eulogize Sarah and to cry. We've spoken in the past, we won't repeat. Ordinarily, you cry, then you eulogize. Why is the Torah described that Avram eulogized and then he cried? The chaf in Velivko is small. Why is it small? We spoke about all these things previously. What does Avram do next? Vayakam Avram me'al pnei meso. Avram gets up. And here we have our second insight of Rabbi Sachs on his yurtzeit. Avram's grief is described in a mere 5 words. Vayakam Avram me'al pnei meso. Then immediately we read Avram rose from beside his dead. From here on, he engages in a flurry of activity with 2 aims. Buy a plot to bury Sarah, find a wife for his son. We have observed 2 people in the Torah who look back, one by implication, the other explicitly. Noah ends his life drunk. The Torah doesn't say why, but we can guess. He's lost an entire world. It's not hard to imagine this righteous man overwhelmed by grief as he replays in his mind all that has happened, wondering whether he might have done something to save more or avert the catastrophe. Lot's wife, against the instruction of the angels, looks back at the cities of the plain, disappears under fire and brimstone, the anger of Hashem. She's turned into a pillar of salt, unable to move on. Against the background of these 2 stories, Avram sets a different precedent. He marks his loss, and then he rises. Avram hears the future calling him. Vayakam Avram me'al pnei meso. Here, the beginning of Parshas Chayei Sarah, Chayei Sarah certainly is a description of loss. Ein isha mesa ela labayla, as we just spoke about. As the Piazetz Rebbe describes, Sarah Imeinu in protest to Hashem over suffering, and yet Avram sets the precedent. Noach can't take his loss. What does he do? He gets drunk. Lot's wife can't take the loss of where she came from. What does she do? She's stuck, a pillar of salt. How does Avram respond? He sets the precedent and he plants within all of us that same capacity. Vayakam Avram me'al pnei meso. How did the Holy Holocaust survivors, how did they respond? How did they react to the destruction of their worlds? Vayakam me'al pnei mesam. They rose, they got up, they put one foot in front of another, they rebuilt. That's the Jewish way. That's the Jewish response. Not like Noach, to wallow, not like Lot's wife, to be stuck and perseverate, to be paralyzed, but to be Avram, Vayakam, to be able to get up. It's easier said than done, and with no judgment to those who are struggling to do it. But it means when a person loses a loved one, when they go through the unbearable, unthinkable loss, it means Vayakam, to find the Avram in us. You know, one of my favorite teachings, Sfas Emes, the Holy Ger Rebbe, when we say in our davening every day, the bracha, Magain Avram, Hashem, you protect Avram, Sfas Emes read it and understood it to mean You protect and preserve the Avram in us. Hashem implanted in our very DNA the strength of Avraham, the faith of Avraham. We have the Avram in us. And if Avram can vayaka me'al panei meso, then we too, to never, God forbid, move on, but to move forward. Jews don't move on, but we do have the capacity to move forward. And that's what Avram teaches. Not moving on. Person who lost a loved one, we never move on. There's a hole in our heart. We never fully heal. We don't move on. But vayaka means we have the capacity to move forward. Perach of Gimel Pasuk Vav. Avram begins the negotiation. Avram comes. Bnei Ches answer Avram. Shma'enu Adoni Nisi Elokim ata besochenu b'mechar kvarenu kvoros meisecha. They turn to Avram. They say, "You're a prince of a man. You're a prince of God. We all know you. Your reputation precedes you. You're an incredible human being. So whatever plot you want, no one's going to stop you. No one's going to prevent you. Choose your plot, whatever it is you want." And the last Rabbi Sachs of the day, Rabbi Sachs says, this is the first instance, the classic example of Kiddush Hashem in the Torah. Noach's righteousness was turned inward. He had no influence on his contemporaries. Lot chose the way of assimilation. He tried to merge society, Sodom, in which he had chosen to live. Avram is different. He fights for his neighbors and prays for them, but he does not become like them. He lives out the principle of the Jewish imperative ever since. Be true to your faith and a blessing to others, regardless of their faith. What's the result? When Avram comes before the Chitas, they say to him, "You are Prince of God in our midst." This is the answer. Avram is the first to make a Kiddush Hashem. Nisi Elokim ata besochenu. Halavai, that should be written on our tombstone. Halavai, it should be said about us at the end of our life. We will have lived a beautiful life. If the non-Jews, non-religious Jews, fellow religious Jews, if what they say about us is, Nisi Elokim ata besochenu. You are a prince of God, a prince of a man or woman, you are royalty of Hashem. Your word was your bond. You had honesty and integrity. You were kind and caring. You lived with faith and you brought others close to Hashem. Nisi Elokim ata besochenu. That's the reputation that Avram has that precedes him. This is the first Kiddush Hashem. Noach was a tzaddik, but he kept it to himself. Lot assimilated and was lost. Avram discovers and lives for Hashem, but also spreads and promulgates the message to anyone who will listen. Perach of Gimel, Pasuk Ches. By the very time Leimorim, Yeshas nafshachem lekvoros mesim lefanai, Shmoni piguli be'Efram ben Sochar. So Avram continues to approach them and he says, if it's truly your will to let me bury my dead, then listen to me and intercede on behalf, introduce me to Ephron. He owns the cave I want. Make an introduction, I'll give you a finder's fee. Let's get this done. Well, what is the word? Im yesh es, if it is your will. What's the word the Torah uses if it's your will? It's a very peculiar word. Pasuk Ches is an open book test. Look inside. Im yesh es, nafshechem. What a funny word. Im yesh es nafshechem. What does nafshechem mean? Your soul. Avram says, if your soul will allow, if your soul, and how do we understand your soul? Why did ArtScroll translate the word nafshechem as, if it is truly your will? Nafshechem doesn't mean will, it means soul. So someone write a letter quickly to ArtScroll. They got it wrong, right? Wrong. Where did ArtScroll get it from? Rashi. Zakt Rashi, nafshechem ritzonchem. Why does soul mean will? Why does soul mean will? Says the Heilige Rav Shmuel ben Abam, the Rosh Yeshiva of Brooklyn, Tifer Shmuel, Hinei roa mikan shemesiras haratzon unikra mesiras nefesh. Ki haratzon shel ha'adam unikra nafsho. You want to know what's in someone's soul? You want to know what their soul is made of? Look at what their will. Look at their want. Look at their drive. Look at their ambition. Look at what they strive for. What is our will? What's our ratzon? Reveals our nefesh. Our ratzon is our nefesh. Mesiras, think about it. What do we call a person who's willing to make great sacrifices in order to accomplish? We call it Mesiras Nefesh. It should be Mesiras Ratzon. What they're revealing is their drive, their will. But we call the sacrifice of the will Mesiras Nefesh. Mesiras Nefesh translates to Mesiras Ratzon. Because if you want to know what someone's their nefesh is all about, look at their Ratzon. I love to say, if you want to know what someone cares about, don't listen to what they say. Look at two things: their bank statement and their calendar. Look at a bank statement and a calendar, and you know what someone really is made of. Not what they say, not what they talk about. If you want to know what someone really cares about, look how they invest their time and how they invest their resources. Look at a bank statement and look at the calendar. How we spend our time, how we invest our resources reveals who we really are. Nafshechem ritzonchem. Like the Mishnah says, Batel ritzonchem ibnei ritzono, v'zeh yisod gadol ba'avodas Hashem. Tzarech levater miritzono la'asos ritzon Hashem. Where do we see this and when do we talk about this? Which is the time of the week designated to work on this? Come on, people. What's the holiest time of the week? The Heilige Raiva Deraiven. Raiva Deraiven is Aramaic for Ratzon Shebertzonos. Ben Hashmoshos, Shabbos Mincha, Shalashidus. Shabbos Mincha is Vanis Filasilach Hashem, Eis Ratzon. Shabbos Mincha, Ben Hashmoshos, Shalashidus is Eis Ratzon. Vanis Filasilach Hashem, Eis Ratzon. Shalashidus is called Ratzon Shebertzonos, Raiva Deraiven. When I make my will conform with His will. It's the most soulful time of the week. That's why we sing Yedid Nefesh Avarachman. The best friend of my nefesh. My nefesh is my ratzon. Nafshechem ritzonchem. V'lo rak mishemuchan limsor nafshem mamish b'shvil g'maveris nikra mesiras nefesh. Kol mishem evatam miritzono lasos ritzon Hashem. When you nullify and surrender your will for the will of Hashem, but Hashem, I want to say that thing. Hashem says, don't say it. But Hashem, I really want to eat that. He says, don't eat it. Hashem, I really want to watch that. Hashem says, don't watch it. But Hashem, I really don't want to give away that money. Hashem says, give it to Boca Raton Synagogue. When you're willing to be moser, your nefesh, Hashem says it, by the way. I've heard him say it. When Hashem says, be moser, your nefesh, means be moser, your ratzon. Sometimes it's harder to be moser, our ratzon. It's harder to sacrifice and surrender our will than it is even our things. But they go together. And that's why Rashi, it's a couple of sentences. All of Rashi is one word. Nafshechem, ritzonchem. One word. Rashi opens up worlds. Nafshechem. You really want to know your soul, who you are, what you're made of? What's ritzonchem? What's your drive? What's your will? You know how you know what somebody wants? Look at what they're doing. Otherwise, you don't really want. You want to want. There's a big difference between what you want and what you want to want. How do you know the difference between what you want and what you want to want? Just look at what you're doing. What you're doing tells you what you want. Because the things that you really want, you do. And if you're not doing it, you don't really want to do it. You want to do it. Did you follow that? And that's all in the one word of Rashi. Ritzonchem. Nafshechem. Nafshechem reveals Ritzonchem. And it's important as we live life to know what goes into the column of my want and what goes into the column of what I want, and to move things over a column. To go from wanting to want, to learn, to daven, take care of our health and wellness, to sleep more, to be kinder. Stop wanting to want and start wanting so that it's something that will happen. Nafshechem is Ritzonchem. Paragraph Daled Pasuk Aleph. So, Avram loses his other half, his better half, Sarah. And what happens next? The Avram Zakein Baba Yamin, bottom of page 108. Avram is old, well on in years. Vashem berachas Avram bakol. And Hashem blessed Avram with everything, which is a really peculiar thing to tell us. He blessed Avram with everything. He did. He just took away his other half. He just lost Sarah Imeinu. And that's called having everything? How does he have everything? So Rashi says, what's everything? Bakol, Ola begamatria, Ben. And now that he had a son, he realizes, I lost my past and my present. Now it's time to turn to my future. And who is my future? My son Yitzchak. And if I want the legacy and life of my Sarah to continue, it's only going to be by finding my Yitzchak a wife so that he can have children, start a family, and we have a continuity and a future. Bakol, Hashem blessed Avram with everything. Everything in Gematria, the numerical value is Ben, son. He starts to now think about his son, Yitzchak, and he realizes with the loss of his past and this enormous change to his present, it's time to invest and to figure out and to turn to his future. Yitzchak is his Bakol. Says Rav Shmuel Berenbaum, Yesh l'daktek lama lo kasu b'ferish b'Torah b'Hashem berachas Avram ben. So what do we have to play this cute gematria? For the gematria lovers? Okay, Bakol is the same numerical value as Ben. So just write Ben. You have to do it through code, through numerical value. Just write Hashem berachas Avram ben. Ben. Hashem blessed Avram with a son. What can we learn from the fact that the Torah conceals this teaching by embedding it in a gematria? Oh, V'yesh lomar, Tinei matzinu b'bris ben absarim, Shamar HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'Avram. When Avram had the bris ben absarim, this conversation, this vision, the covenant with Hashem, and Hashem tells him, Al tira Avram, Anochi magen lecha, don't worry, I'm going to protect you. Schar harbe ma'od. Avram says, but how do I know? I'm going through life alone. I don't have any children. And Avram says, Lo nasata zera. I don't have a child. Ben Beisa Yorish, I don't have anyone to inherit me. And Rashi there says, Ma to'eles bakol asher titein li. Go back to the bris ben absarim, and what was Avram challenging Hashem? What's the point of bakol, of all these things you've given me, if I have no one to give it to? I want to quickly point out, there are people who aren't blessed with biological children, but when a person lives a life that all of Jewish children are their children, they too have to whom to bequeath. In this sense, I always think about the Lubavitcher Rebbe and Rebbitzin. The Rebbe and his Rebbitzin had no biological children, but I don't know anyone, certainly in the last several centuries or millennia, who had more children than the Rebbe and the Rebbitzin, who had more children. This Sunday is the Kinnis HaShluchim. I should really go. I'm one of the Shluchim. I don't want to show off, but I'm a general in Tzavos Hashem. I don't want to show off, but I'm a general. How many stars? It's not important, but I'm a general. The Kinnis HaShluchim has, I don't even know what it's up to this year, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 Shluchim around the world. You telling me the Rebbe had no children? The Rebbe and his Rebbitzin had no children? 8,000 Shluchim and all their families who live and breathe his message every single day, have his portrait hanging in their shul every day. And you're going to say he had no children? So certainly one can have no biological children, but when they invest their time, their energy, their resources, their commitment to leaving a legacy, a future for the Jewish people in the world, they have many children. But Avram in that moment turns to Hashem and he says, Ma to'elas bakol asher titenli. What's the point of bakol, of all that you're giving me, if there's no future, if there's no one to give it to? Who am I going to give it to? Avram lo bikesh leben kedei lishtashei imo. So why did Avram want a child? Someone to throw the ball around with? Someone to bring him his slippers? Why was Avram looking for a son, a child? Someone to bear his name? Avram Jr.? You call Junior? Avram says, what's the point? You've made me the biggest influencer. I've got 10 million followers on X, 20 million average views on YouTube. I'm transforming the world, but when I'm gone, it all ends. So what's the point? Who's going to inherit? Who's going to continue? Who's going to pick up the baton after me? That's when HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises him, don't worry, there's a plan. And that's when he tells him he loves him. And therefore, now we could spend the whole Parshas Chayei Sarah, I'm starting a series soon. 5 to 10 minute videos, maybe 10 parts, maybe more, on Shidduchim. Shidduchim in second, I got to figure out a good name, a catchy name. Emunah and Shidduchim. I think, important values and principles in Shidduchim. I'm going to put out that series soon. We could spend all Parshas Chayei Sarah on it. My friend Tzadok texted me yesterday, and we've been going back and forth. He says, this is my Parsha, Chayei Sarah. He's got all these divrei Torah, we're going back and forth. So here, Shmuel Berenbaum extracts a lesson for Shidduchim. If you have a child or grandchild or friend or neighbor or niece or nephew, or you're in Shidduchim, basically if you're alive, listen carefully. Pasuk zehu akdama lefarish lama hishtadl Avraham Avinu kolkach. Why does Avram express and exert so much effort for the shidduch of his son? Why? Why doesn't he trust in Hashem? It's going to happen. The right girl is going to knock on the door and sweep Yitzchak off his feet. Yitzchak and this right girl, they go running to each other at a speed dating, at a singles Shabbaton. Why is Avram putting in so much effort? Eliezer, he makes Eliezer swear, sends Eliezer with wealth. He puts all kinds of conditions on Eliezer. He davens. Why is he invested so much in the initiative and effort, the hishtadlus? Ayin Rashi, Kol Tov Adono Biyado, Shtar Matana Kasel Yitzchak Kol Shelo, Kadesh Yikvetzu L'Shloach Lo Batam. V'Hizir Eliezer, Azhara Chamura. He makes Eliezer swear, calls all of his lawyers, writes up incredible documents, has them notarized. He puts an enormous hishtadlus. Why? Listen to what he says. Musar Haskel Lanu. When you're working on finding a shidduch for your child, before you find a shidduch for your child, you have to pause and remember and reflect that your children are your bakol. Your house, your car, your portfolio, your net worth, your reach, your influence, your followers, your fans, all of it is not who you are. What is your bakol? Those children. Finding them their mate, creating their continuity, helping them build their home, helping them, empowering them, enabling them to pick up the baton and continue where you leave off. That's the bakol. That's the bakol. You can't be casual. You can't take it lightly. You can't make a minimal effort. The reason it takes your all is reflective that they are your all. A person has to put in their all for the shidduch because the child is their all. In fact, the Gemara in Kedushin Daf Lamed teaches that a part of the responsibility of a parent, of a father, is to find a shidduch for their son. La'asio isha minalan. Where do we learn that from? Kechun Hashem v'alidu banim. We learn it from a pasuk. He goes on and on. I want to get through many more ideas. He has pages and pages on this. But this is the message of Rav Shmuel Berenbaum, that a person has to remember. Hashem berachas Avram bakol. It could have said Hashem berachas Avram beben. It doesn't. It says Hashem berachas Avram instead, bakol. Why? Gematria, to remember that ben is the bakol. And therefore, when you're looking for the shidduch, remember what matters, what's important. Remember who you are. Remember what is your legacy. And therefore, don't approach casually or lightly. Take it seriously and put in your bakol. Rav Druk goes somewhat in the opposite direction. Rav Druk, and again, we have a lot more to say about this, and we're going to say a lot more about this. But Rav Druk goes in a little bit of the opposite direction. Rav Druk points out the following. Skip ahead. Perach of Dalet Pasuk Nun. We have Avram makes Eliezer swears. He sets the criteria. Eliezer goes on his way. He stops and he says to God, whatever woman will give me to drink and my camels to drink. She's the one, the chesed. And then indeed, she comes out. She offers the camels. He realizes she is the one. Even though the water rose to greet her, and that miracle should have been enough to realize she's the one, he still waited for the sign. What do you learn from that? We've talked about in the past. And then he says, she's the one, take me home to your father. And he meets Lavan and Besuel. Perach of Dalet, Pasuk Nun, verse 50. We don't often get to verse 50. Meaning, I don't just mean in the Parsha class we don't get to it, which is also true. How many psukim in this parak? 67. I don't know if it is. It probably is the longest parak in Chumash. Why is it so long? 67 verses. Torah takes up and dedicates more space to this saga, to the story of the shidduch of Yitzchak, than it does to the laws of Shabbos. Many more, multifold. Why? So Rashi quotes Chazal who also pick up on this. But Pasuk Nun. Vayan Lavan b'suv vayomer me'Hashem yatsa davar lo nuchal daber elecha ra v'tov. When Eliezer comes and says, I met your daughter, your sister, I read the resume, I called the references. He actually doesn't say that because he didn't do that. He says, I met her, and I'm impressed by her, and I see her midos, and she's the one. She's the one. I'd like to bring her home. And how do Lavan and Besuel react? What do they say? Seems good. Me Hashem yatsa davar. Seems like this came from God. Lo nuchal daber elecha ra'ata. We can't say anything good or bad. Says Rav Druk in his Lavos Eish. Hagra, the Vilna Gaon, writes on Parshas Pekudei, the great Vilna Gaon, Ki es askos v'hishtadlus b'inyanei shidduchim hishav v'hevel. Effort and initiative in the area of shidduchim is a waste of time. Not Efrem Goldberg, the Vilna Gaon. V'ko kasav sham b'soch advarim, and these are the words of the Gora, of the Gaon. Im Hashem lo yivne bayis, shav amlo bonav bo. Shu azivuk shenikra binyan bayis ki yadua. Im Hashem lo yivne bayis, sheshavu esek b'nei adam binyan azivuk. Sha'akolu me'es Hashem li olam. V'zeu shekasav, achevel b'nei adam kaza b'nei ish rak mazdayim lalos aval hema me'evel yachad. That's the Gra. The Gra says, we know Chazal tell us, what has Hashem been doing? How has he been occupying himself? From Sheshis to Mebreshis. Since he finished creating the world, what is Hashem doing? Mezaveg zivugim. He's making shidduchim. So while other areas of life he's delegated to intermediaries, this is how he occupies his time. Hashem is the ultimate and the great shadchan, and he's creating these matches. Says the Gra, if that's the case, get out of his way. Stop trying to control, micromanage, manipulate. Effort, we have to do a little effort for everything. Shlomo Zalman quotes this Gra, and Shlomo Zalman Auerbach writes that people get it backwards. This is what Shlomo Zalman says, based on this Gra. He says, in the area where people are supposed to show initiative, they don't show enough initiative, and they sit back and say, Hashem's in charge, Hashem will provide, Hashem in control. And in the area where they're supposed to say Hashem is in charge, Hashem is in control, they excessively express initiative. When it comes to Parnasa, we say, I'm doing my job, but Hashem, make me rich. Hashem, I have faith in you. Hashem, you're in charge. No, Hashem says, no, buddy. Get up, go to work hard. It's not going to happen. And in the area of Shidduchim, we say, Hashem, don't worry, I've got it. I reached out to all the Shadchanim, I send out the resume, I mutcher and I repeat and I remind and I resend. Says Rav Shlomo Zalman, writing Halacha L'Maisa like this Gra, that Shidduchim are the area we have to take effort, take initiative, but it should be minimal. You have to. In today's day and age, I hate calling it a resume. I like to call it a profile. You have to have a profile. You should share it with people, remind them you exist, be on people's radar, attend appropriate places and events where Hashem can work his magic, but not excessive. If anything, minimal initiative, and let Hashem do his work. Let Hashem. So I don't think it's a contradiction what Rav Shmuel ben Rabam said and what Rav Druk is quoting from the Gra. I think you can reconcile the two. Rav ben Rabam is saying that the pshat, that bakol is begematria ben, means our attitude, how hard we daven, Last week in Siddur Snippets, we quoted a skula for Shidduchim. There were 20 older Bachram in Chevron who weren't married. They learned of this skula. They did it, and all 20 were engaged within 2 months. Rebbetzin Batsheva Kanievsky credits all of her children getting married from it. And her father, Rav Yoshev, told her it's why she and all her siblings got married. Skula. What is it? You got to listen to Siddur Snippets. I'm not telling you. You're going to have to listen to Siddur Snippets from last week. And you're going to have to figure out which one. You'll have to figure it out. I don't believe in skulas. It's not a silly superstition. It's a special tefillah to Hashem inserted at a special time. This Kapitel Tehillim said in this time brings extra merit to help those who are looking to get married. So that's what Shmuel ben Rabban was saying. If you realize that your children and grandchildren are your bakol, they're everything. They're your legacy, they're your future, they're your life. If they're your bakol, you're going to daven with everything you have. But at the same time, while you put all of your faith in Hashem, your initiative will be minimal, because this is the time in the area. Get out of Hashem's way and let Him work His magic. That's what Rav Druk continues. The Gemara Moed tells us, Me Hashem isha le'ish. You see it in Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim. Where do you see it in Torah? Me Hashem isha, that Hashem is the one who makes these introductions. Vayan Lavan and Besuel, Vayomer Me Hashem yatzah davar. Even Lavan and Besuel knew it. Even the lowly Lavan and Besuel knew it. When Eliezer says, I think we've got a match, let's close the shidduch, l'chaim, they say, Me Hashem yatzah davar. It's from Hashem. It feels and it seems it's from Hashem. Don't rush into things. Take your time. Know that you're ready. Listen to the future 10-part series on Shidduchim. Listen to it. It'll be well worth it. I don't know what it is yet and it hasn't come out yet, but listen to it. It's going to be fantastic. So you have to take your time. You have to feel comfortable. You have to know you're right. We're living in a time, at least in my lifetime, an unprecedented amount of broken engagements and very early divorces. I think there's something we need to learn and do differently about dating to avoid that. But yet, Me Hashem yatzah davar. We have to realize. So, you got a name, you suggested it to a shadchan, the shadchan suggested it didn't come back. What are you going to do? Tell 3 more shadchanim? Force that person's hand? Make that boy go out with your daughter? It's Me Hashem yatzah. No, we don't believe in that. You did your minimal hishtadlus, now get out of the way. Me Hashem yatzah davar. It comes from Hashem. It comes from the Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim. Me Hashem isha le'ish. From Hashem, it's determined who will marry whom. So why do Lavan and Besuel say, we have nothing to say, tov or l'ra? They should have something to say, l'tov. If they really believe that Me Hashem yatzah davar, they should answer what? L'tov. What they meant was, we can't improve it and we can't ruin it. It's all from Hashem. People worry. Say, they called this reference, but the reference didn't really know me, and maybe they gave the wrong information. And that's why they didn't give a yes. And therefore, maybe we should call back and have the other reference who can correct and clear the picture. If Hashem wanted it to work out, they would have given the yes. And if they gave the no, it's because it wasn't meant to be. You did your effort. Don't overdo it. That's what Rav Druk says is what means l'tov or l'ra. It means other people cannot influence for good or for bad, because why? Me Hashem yatzah davar. This is the area of life that it comes from Hashem, and other people can't interfere l'tov or l'ra. That's hard. It takes a lot of emunah to believe that. It's an avoda. It takes work to say, I'm not going to be annoyed, upset, that reference, that shadchan, that person, maybe they blew it, maybe they interfered, maybe they could have done something positive and they didn't, maybe they did something negative and it needs to be corrected. That's the wrong thinking. We have to work on ourselves to realize and to think, Me Hashem yatzah davar. Minimal initiative, and then get out of the way. It's from Hashem. If He wants a yes, it'll be a yes. If it was a no, it's because Hashem wanted it to be a no. That Hashem is guiding with His hand this process more than any other. More than any other. Me Hashem yatzah davar. And Me Hashem yatzah davar that we have to end, though I don't want to. I'm halfway through my notes. Meaning we should be halfway through the shir. If I were going to communicate and transmit everything I want to tell you. And there's so many amazing things to tell you. So many more great things to tell you, and I didn't get to. So let's finish with one more. The last one comes from the new Sefer, Rav Avram Shor Shlita, Mori V'Rabbi Rav Shor Halekach V'Alibov Nezer Parsha and Breshis. Fantastic. Each and every one. Highly recommend. And he says the following. Perach of Dalet Pasuk Yud Aleph. Now, when Eliezer first comes, this is Eliezer, we're going back. Eliezer first arrives, Torah tells us he made the camels kneel down outside the city at a well. When is it? Le'is Erev, Le'is Tzeis HaShoavos. It's evening, the time when the women who draw the water come out. Le'is Erev, and Vayomar Hashem Elokei Avram, and this is when the next pasuk tells us, Vayomar Hashem Elokei Adoni Avram Akreina Lefanai Hayom, and then the pasuk tells us, he said, Hashem, God of my master Avram, may you so arrange it for me this day, and so on and so forth. Says Rav Shor, Kvar heiru b'mefarshei Torah ki kanera tevos leis erev hem yusarim. Why do I need to know leis erev? What does it add to say it was the evening? All it had to say was it was the time of day when the women come to the well. Why do I have to be told it's the evening? This is when the come to work the well. Ain't nafkamina. What do I care? The morning, the night, the afternoon. What do I care when? The Zohar Kodesh says, Hakavana shaya erev Shabbos. Eis erev means it was erev Shabbos. Tzrichin lahavim ma kavana. What does it mean? Says Rav Shor, I'll tell it to you and summarize outside since we're out of time. Hakre lefanai, when Eliezer uses this time of Eis erev to turn to Hashem and say, make it work for me, it's an allusion to Asher Hakre lefanai, Asher korcha baderach. Who are the ones who attacked us on the way? Asher korcha baderach, Amalek. Who are domestic Eliezer? Hikar abori olam amani kobriya. This Eis erev means not the Eis erev the evening. It means Eis erev the time of darkness, the gullus. Eliezer says when a Jew is approaching the gullus, when a Jew is approaching being cloaked in darkness, Hakrena, Hashem, protect us from the Amalek. Hear us and bring to fruition this reality. And what do we do? Hakrena, what is the trup over Vayomar? And he said, a shalshelis. Shalshelis, the threefold, is an allusion to Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. When a Jew, shanu nimtzaim begalas hamar hazeh, anu machkim lebiyasa shemelach hamashiach, anu rom ki mitmamei alavo, af apishi yismameim kozeh achak elo, uma mutal aleinu lasos. Halo aleinu laharim kolan b'tfila, levakesh tachanunim yakodesh baruch hu. V'zeh merumaz b'shalshelis, b'parshasenu al vayomar. Koach hatfila, shegila lanu ha'eved. V'yeshlama ki ha'shalshelis meramez, ki tzrichim espal b'haramas kol. Like the Gushas Levi says, the shalshelis is a cry, a call, a prayer to Hashem. The threefold shalshelis is that cry, zigzag, up and down, that cry, that wail, that moan. Le'eis erev, when we're entering the darkness of the galus, hakred nai vayomar, we have to cry and call out and ask Hashem to protect us and to orchestrate the end of this galus. This Eis erev, Eliezer's attitude at that Eis erev is instructive of our Eis erev, and just like erev Shabbos after Chatzos, one can already feel the energy of Shabbos. Le'eis erev, the end of this galus. We are now, writes Rav Shor, Schalta de Geula, we're Ikvasa de Mashiach, we're the Bechina of after Chatzos of erev Shabbos. You could feel Ot Mashiach is coming. It's Eis erev. Ot he's going to arrive. This is not the ordinary time of Galus. These aren't the last 2,000 years. It's already the Bechina of after Chatzos. Ot erev Shabbos, Mashiach Mitz Hashem should come. B'mheira v'yameinu. It should be a day of Besuros Tovos. Stay happy, stay healthy, and stay holy. Again.